I think it really helps us.
The Centers for Disease Control's official website has a page that reads, "You may laugh now, but when it happens, you'll be happy you read this. And hey, maybe you'll even learn a thing or two about how to prepare for a real emergency." The government organization, burdened with protecting the public from terrifying and deadly strains of germs and diseases, has a plan for the most terrifying apocalypse situation of all, the zombie apocalypse. On a blog from the CDC, a thorough plan has been laid out in order to prepare for such an outbreak.
Friday is International Asteroid Day. A 24-hour live broadcast will include everything you've ever wanted to know about these rocky bits of space debris, the threats they may pose to Earth, and what we can gain from studying them. The date commemorates the Earth's largest record asteroid impact in 1908, when a powerful asteroid struck a river in a remote Siberian forest of Russia. The event leveled trees and destroyed forests across 770 square miles, or 3/4 of the state of Rhode Island.
Earlier this month, a swarm of minor earthquakes rattled Yellowstone National Park. Seismologists at the University of Utah tracked 878 earthquakes in 2 weeks. And considering the park sits on a supervolcano, it sounds bad, but swarms of tiny earthquakes are actually normal at Yellowstone. Experts with the U.S. Geological Survey say swarms account for about half of the park's seismic activity each year, and they don't make the volcano any more likely to erupt. The quakes can come from normal activity at fault lines, magma movement, or pressure from water heated by that magma. The steam from the superheated water gives Yellowstone its famous geysers. Experts say if Yellowstone was about to erupt, there'd be more troubling signs. Magma rising to the surface might cause more frequent and stronger earthquakes than those from this swarm, and the ground might deform, or there might be more steam venting. But there's also no way to forecast how or when an eruption might happen for sure. Keep that in mind the next time you're watching Old Faithful.
For these people, it's a case that could not come soon enough. 3 former executives from Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant went on trial for criminal negligence over the 2011 nuclear disaster there.
Many people have suffered badly in ways that changed their lives. We want these men to realize how many people are feeling sadness and anger.
After the nuclear plant was hit by a powerful earthquake and tsunami, 3 reactors had meltdowns, and radiation spread into surrounding communities. Tens of thousands of people were forced to evacuate, and some areas remain uninhabitable more than 6 years later. The year-long trial is expected to determine whether the men should have been aware of the risk, and whether the disaster could have been prevented.
How did this nuclear accident happen? What was the cause of it? Who was responsible? I hope this trial will clarify these points.
Although more than 20,000 people were killed from the earthquake and tsunami, the Fukushima accident itself is not officially recorded as having directly killed anyone. The charges against the 3 executives are linked to the deaths of more than 40 people who were evacuated to hospital from the Fukushima area and later died. If convicted, the men face up to 5 years in prison and fines of up to $9,000.
Less than a year after a study claimed humans have hit their lifespan limit, several scientists have put forth an argument. They say there's no way to know how long we can live. That new theory comes in response to an October 2016 report published in the journal Nature, claiming, quote, maximum longevity has hit a ceiling of 114.9 years. 5 separate research teams published their critiques in the same journal June 28th. The teams aren't saying we can live forever. All they're suggesting is that we can't know if there is a limit. They point to evidence that overall, trends in longevity keep going up. In 1900, the average American died at the age of 47. 7 decades later, they were living to 71. These new reports argue a plateau has not been reached, and we can't know for sure what the future holds for us.
U.S. President Donald Trump will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin next week at a summit in Germany that brings 2 world leaders face to face for the first time. Both the Kremlin and the White House announced on Thursday that the pair will meet on the sidelines of the summit of the G20 nations in Hamburg on July 7th and 8th. No agenda had been set so far for the meeting, which is fraught with difficulties for Trump. Allegations that Russia interfered in the U.S. presidential election last year and colluded with the Republicans' campaign have overshadowed the businessman's unexpected victory and dogged his first 5 months in office. Russia and the United States are also at odds over the Ukraine, NATO expansion, and the civil war in Syria. Trump has frequently called for better ties with Russia, but lawmakers in his own Republican Party are urging him to be wary of Moscow.
A new poll shows Filipinos have more confidence in U.S. President Donald Trump than any other country that was surveyed. A Pew Research Center poll released June 26 shows 69% of Filipinos have confidence in Trump. About 1,000 Filipinos took part in the survey. Other countries where Trump's confidence rating polled over 50% were Nigeria, Vietnam, Israel, and Russia. In contrast, the median confidence rating across Latin America was 14%. In Europe, the median rating was 18%. Of the countries that were polled, Mexico displayed the lowest confidence in Trump. The poll shows only 8% of Mexicans have confidence in Trump, who has advocated for building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border.
If there's one thing that makes Rodrigo Duterte stand out, it's his use of frank and often offensive language. Just 2 months in office, he had some choice words for former U.S. President Barack Obama.
You must be respectful. Do not just throw away questions and statements. Putang ina, mumurahin kita dyan sa forum na yan.
Duterte later apologized, but he hasn't turned it down. But many of his tough guy comments have translated into action, most recently during the biggest challenge he's faced so far, the battle to recapture the southern city of Marawi from militants. Duterte's response included deploying around 3,000 soldiers and declaring martial law across the entire island of Mindanao. And it's been met with little criticism. His war on drugs campaign has equally strong public support, even though it's been condemned by human rights groups. But his trademark confidence seems to wane when it comes to foreign policy. Duterte announced plans to militarize disputed parts of the South China Sea, but so far it hasn't happened. At the same time, he wants to strengthen ties with China, one of the Philippines' biggest trading partners. Experts say Duterte has to be pragmatic.
The fundamental assumption or the fundamental belief is that China is too strong for us. China is too strong for us, and that it would be in our best interest to get along with China.
The Trump administration wants to sell a military arms package to Taiwan totaling about $1.4 billion. CNN reports the sale would include technical help for early warning radar as well as torpedoes and missiles. Now, this sale is actually worth quite a bit less than some previous arms sales to Taiwan. In late 2015, the Obama administration announced a $1.8 billion sale. And in 2011, the U.S. made a $5.8 billion deal with Taiwan, primarily to help it upgrade its aging F-16 fighter jets. China wasn't happy about those sales, and it isn't pleased with this one. China views Taiwan as part of its territory under the One China policy. The US doesn't necessarily endorse the policy, but to keep the peace, it also doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. However, under the Taiwan Relations Act, the US is legally obligated to provide Taiwan with the military weapons and services it needs to defend itself. Also on Thursday, US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin proposed new sanctions against a Chinese bank with ties to North Korea. Those sanctions and the arms sale could make it harder for President Donald Trump to convince Chinese President Xi Jinping to help curb North Korea's missile program. If Congress has any objections to the Taiwan arms sale, it needs to raise them within the next month.
It's the 20th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover from the UK to China, and Chinese President Xi Jinping is celebrating with a visit to the territory. But that visit has pro-democracy protesters up in arms. Since 2004, the Chinese government has retained the right to veto any of the city's plans for suffrage. That tight hand on the city birthed years of protest in at least 12 different pro-democracy groups. During the fall of 2014, more than 100,000 people protested as part of Occupy Central, a response to the Chinese government's decision to allow partially democratic elections for Hong Kong in 2017. This movement hasn't slowed down in time for the city's 20th anniversary, and anti-Beijing sentiment is still very strong among young citizens. Hong Kong police have put up barriers to separate protesters from the ceremonies, and if that's not enough, over 10,000 police officers and elite combat-ready troops have been deployed to protect President Xi. Over 24 protesters have already been arrested, including key activist leader Joshua Wong.
Donald Trump's new travel ban has only just come into effect, but already dozens of protesters chant this slogan on the streets of New York. Syria, Libya, Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. As of Friday, citizens of these predominantly Muslim countries will be banned from entering the US without a current visa for 90 days. At airports across the country, lawyers are volunteering to offer legal advice and ensure exemptions from the ban are being properly applied. For the moment, the Supreme Court has only greenlit a partial version of the Muslim ban and should release its final decision come October.
It is a daily ritual. Boats crammed with migrants set off from the Libyan coast. Sometimes still within sight of shore, they are picked up, often by NGOs. Next stop, Italy. But the Italian government says it has had enough. In the last 5 days, 11,000 migrants have arrived in Italy. On Monday alone, 5,000 made it. And in the first 5 months of this year, more than 60,000 migrants came through Italy's ports. For months, Italy has been appealing for help. At an EU summit last week, more funds were promised. But a long-term plan to strengthen Libya's coast guard and give aid to African states from where most migrants come is not working.
We are ready to increase our support to Italy, including substantial financial support if needed. All member states now need to deliver and show solidarity towards Italy.
Under political pressure at home, Italy's government is threatening to stop ships flying foreign flags docking in the country's ports. That's probably against international law, but it's a sign of the country's desperation. People are still dying in the Mediterranean, but some accuse NGOs of providing an incentive for people smugglers and making matters worse. For Italy, a political price is being paid for the sheer volume of arrivals. The government is desperate for other EU states to share the growing burden.
The 440,000 people that have returned have returned, and this is what we have observed as a trend this year between January and essentially end of May. So the first half of the year this is a significant trend and a significant number.
Reuters has reported that a war monitor said Islamic State regained control over most of the industrial district in Syria's Raqqa on Friday. The assault marked Islamic State's first sustained effort to fight back against the slow advance into Raqqa by the Syrian Democratic Forces. The SDF, a U.S.-backed alliance of Kurdish and Arab groups, took the industrial district this month in its biggest gain so far in Islamic State's Syrian capital of Raqqa. It said on Friday that there had been heavy clashes since late Thursday in East Raqqa, where the industrial district is located. However, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a British-based war monitor, said Islamic State had regained control over most of the industrial area in fierce fighting.
Nervous Iraqi troops checking exhausted civilians. Finally free after months trapped in the battle to retake Mosul from the Islamic State militant group. Iraqi forces and their allies say they're just days away from fully liberating the city, which ISIL made its capital 3 years ago. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared on Thursday the end of ISIL's self-proclaimed caliphate in the country. But some die-hard ISIL fighters are still bottled up in a handful of neighborhoods. The army is retaking the old city meter by meter to try and protect the civilians still trapped within. In a huge symbolic victory, troops seized what's left of the medieval Al-Nuri Mosque. ISIL proclaimed its caliphate from that mosque 3 years ago and blew it up earlier this week as the US-backed forces closed in. The past 8 months of fighting have devastated Mosul, leaving thousands of civilians killed and nearly half of the city's population displaced.
This refugee camp, these Indonesian women told us they joined ISIS in 2015, traveling 5,000 miles because they believed ISIS propaganda.
If you go there, you move to their place, you go to the paradise because you are the real Muslim.
In reality, they told us they were abused and their male relatives imprisoned by the extremists because they refused to fight. They ran away 2 weeks ago, they said, and are too frightened of retribution from ISIS to show their faces.
We are so stupid. Not just naive, we are stupid. Yeah, we deceive very easily.
South Korea's president expressed his commitment to working with his U.S. counterpart during his 5-day visit to the United States. President Moon Jae-in said a Korea-United States alliance is important and expressed his intention to work with U.S. President Donald Trump to address issues like North Korea's increasing nuclear capability. In a symbolic move on Wednesday, June 28th, Moon visited the newly unveiled Korean War Monument for the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in Virginia. In a speech there, according to the Korea Herald, he said the Korea-U.S. alliance was, quote, forged in the fires of war. He added that he would work with President Trump to, quote, bring about the end of the North Korean nuclear program and peace on the Korean peninsula. At the time of this report, Moon had met with congressional leaders and was set to meet with Trump for further talks on Friday.
Magistrates in France have placed Marine Le Pen under formal investigation. This over allegations that European Union funding had been misused by the leader of the far-right National Front. Le Pen was summoned to appear before financial investigators in Paris on Friday. The far-right leader denies any wrongdoing and laughed off the claims during the recent presidential election campaign. The former MEP lost the French presidential race in a runoff, but was recently elected to Parliament.
Police said a man was arrested on Thursday after attempting to drive his vehicle through a crowd gathered outside a mosque in the Paris suburb of Créteil. According to a police statement, the man rammed his SUV into protective barriers outside the Créteil Mosque multiple times around 6:30 p.m. local time. Police said because he couldn't get through the barriers, he tried to go down another route but hit an obstacle and fled. No one was wounded in the assault and the driver was arrested at his home. The statement said the police firmly condemn this act and are doing everything to investigate and understand the motivation of the driver.
Germany is cracking down on social media sites that don't take down hate speech. German parliament passed a law allowing the government to fine companies over $5.7 million if they don't remove, quote, obviously criminal content within 24 hours. Germany has been moving toward measures like this for a while. Last year, authorities there conducted a nationwide raid on people suspected of disseminating hateful and criminal online content. And it's not just Germany. France and the UK want to impose legal liability on sites they say create a safe space for extremist content. Critics of Germany's legislation argue the time restrictions are impractical and removing content could impede freedom of expression. But Heiko Maas, a federal minister in Germany, disputed that and told the German parliament, quote, "Freedom of expression ends where criminal law begins."
German lawmakers voted to legalize same-sex marriage. Earlier this week, Chancellor Angela Merkel called for a conscience vote on whether to legalize same-sex marriage in her country. That allowed members of parliament to vote according to their personal beliefs rather than along party lines. On Friday, after years of pressure from the public and many members of parliament, the Bundestag, parliament's lower house, voted to approve marriage for same-sex couples. Germany is one of the few Western countries that doesn't allow same-sex couples to marry. Instead, couples can enter a civil union. Part of the reason for the delay could be because Merkel, who heads the conservative Christian Democratic Union, holds fairly traditional values. Still, it appears efforts from left-leaning political parties and German citizens paid off, but it's not a done deal yet. The measure still needs to go through a few more steps, and it's expected to face some legal challenges.
The Texas Supreme Court ruled on Friday that same-sex couples are not necessarily entitled to government-dispensed spousal benefits, dealing a blow to backers of marriage equality who have vowed to appeal. The Republican-dominated court said the landmark 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Obergefell v. Hodges, which made same-sex marriage legal nationwide, did not resolve issues such as payments of municipal employees' spousal benefits. The Supreme Court held in Obergefell that the Constitution requires states to license and recognize same-sex marriages to the same extent that they license and recognize opposite-sex marriages. But it did not hold that states must provide the same publicly funded benefits to all married persons. Rights groups for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people contended the plaintiffs were trying to erode the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on an already settled matter.
These women in Iran don't want to be told what to wear, so they're protesting as a part of a campaign called White Wednesdays. Iranian law says women in the country must cover their heads. It's been that way since the Islamic Revolution at the end of the 70s. But women have taken to the streets and filmed themselves in protest while wearing white clothing or simply posted pictures online using a hashtag. The movement, started by the group My Stealthy Freedom, has grown. Now men in Iran and women around the world are speaking out in solidarity. Those participating say they have nothing against someone deciding to wear a headscarf, but they just want to be able to choose.
من یک انسانم، یک زنم، بالغم و خودم میتونم تشخیص بدم